Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my place. Today, I've got a special treat for you, an interview with Billy Konrad. Ooh, yes, we've got a special treat. It's Billy Konrad, the senior Iyengar teacher from California who now lives in Lisbon, Portugal. I had a very special treat this summer. I was able to attend one of his workshops in Porto, and he gave me some of his time next to the swimming pool and gave me a few of his insights. So let's check him out. Billy Konrad, thank you for letting me interview you. Thank you very much. We know each other right now since last summer, and there's lots of things that I have been wanting to ask you but never have time. And my first question is, how did you come to yoga? Or how did yoga come to you?
Let's see. I was at university, and all through my childhood I had been an athlete. And my older sister Annette, she practiced yoga, and she had noticed that my body was starting to get very stiff. I was probably 19 or 20 years old, something like that. Mm-hmm. And just as a kind of supplement to my athletic career, I was doing triathlons and running a lot at the time. As part of my training, she suggested that I go to a yoga class, and she suggested the Iyengar Institute in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And sounded good to me, so I went. And the very first yoga class I ever took was with the teacher who I studied with for many, many years in San Francisco. And the first maybe 5 years was just a way to prevent injury or heal from injury, and a kind of supplement to the running and triathlons.
Oh, triathlons, okay.
Yeah, it was a very innocent start. But actually at the time, when I was 19, I had a pretty serious mental breakdown. So even though I originally went to yoga just for the kind of physical aspect of dealing with injuries in the body, preventing injuries in the body, almost unknowingly, when I started practicing, I guess I was probably 20 or 21. So it was maybe a year and a half after this pretty strong break that I had psychologically. And unknowingly, especially going to the Iyengar world, putting your feet on the ground and putting all that accent on the standing poses, it was very good getting me out of my head and into my feet. And just by luck, I also found some relief for what was going on psychologically too. And that's kind of how it started, my big sister.
Yay, big sister.
Yeah.
And what is, to you, now, with the practice that you have behind you, what is, to you, the essence of yoga? What does that represent?
What is the essence of yoga? Let's see. I think being a human being implies many different systems. It implies a physical system, it implies a psychological system, it implies an emotional system, it implies what we call a spiritual system, even though I don't really like that word. And yoga is this kind of very practical, step-by-step exploration of what it means to be human. You go through your physical body and you find out how it works mechanically, how it connects to each other. Even on the physical level, how cleaning up the mechanics of the body helps improve the functionality of the physiology, of the organic functioning. And so this sort of outermost layer of what it means to be human, yoga provides at the same time an exploration, but also a kind of cleaning up, a deep improving of how it works, how it functions. And then through that process of exploring the physical system, you start to encounter what we call the deeper systems. Whether it has to do with the mind, the emotions, the psychology, even questions of philosophy and so-called spirituality. And all of those things make up, as far as I can see, all of those things make up what it means to be a human being. And since I was born a human being, I guess I'm interested in what it means to be a human. And yoga seems to provide a tradition and an art that allows for a deep exploration and a very interesting exploration of what it means to be alive as a human being.
Mm-hmm. Which leads me to one of my other questions. I don't know if you know, but I'm also a singing teacher and a singer by trade. And I have since I've been practicing yoga, tried to infuse my singing lessons with yoga as much as I possibly can, because to me it's such a perfect marriage, and there's so many parallels in singing as in yoga. And what I want to ask you, in singing we say, it's said that intention precedes the sound. What parallels does that draw for you as a yoga teacher to the deepening of an asana?
Because yoga is nothing more than a laboratory to find out what is the dance between action and consequence. And action is always preceded by intention. So, we kind of get lost in our lives in the consequences of our actions and the consequences of our thoughts, without ever recognizing, not without ever, but we rarely take time to step back and realize that before any action there has to be some kind of intention. And if you act unconsciously, then you're going to have to dance with the consequences also unconsciously. Mm-hmm. So this sentence for me is completely yogic, because really any action implies some kind of intent. There's a very lazy translation of the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita saying that you're supposed to act without the desire for consequence, which is a terrible interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, because any action implies a desire for a consequence. Any action implies intent. As far as I understand what the teaching of yoga is that we need to have detachment from the consequences of the action and the attachment we have to the consequences. But without getting lost in that debate, because yoga itself is action, and then the investigation of the consequence of each action, intent comes first. So, yeah.
Okay. And why do you think there's so much prescribed doctrine proclaimed in modern day yoga? Why do you think that is? Because I think both of us have observed that.
Prescribed doctrine, do you mean like a kind of dogma?
Yeah. And what kind of impact does that have on modern day yoga? Be it positive or negative? I'm not going to label that.
It's a huge question. Any dogma is going to come from some kind of psychological insecurity. Whether I impose my dogma on somebody else, that's going to come from my own insecurity. Or if somebody tries to impose their dogma on me, that will come from their insecurity. If I accept the imposed dogma, now we're back to my insecurity. So dogma is always going to be about somewhere somebody is not feeling so secure about what they think and what they believe, or what they have concluded. And because of that lack of comfort, because of that internal agitation, to almost convince themselves that what they think and believe is true, they turn it into a dogma. Yeah. And this story can be told throughout all of human history. I would say that that's one part of it. You could even think of it as something much simpler and more innocent than that. When each of us finds an approach that has value for us, we kind of fall in love with it. And in the beginning, we're very, almost innocently excited to share it with other people. But if you don't watch out for your ego, that innocence with time builds into a whole kind of structure, and we can become dogmatic over time if we don't pay attention. Because some people, they're not going to find the same value in things that you find value in. And if you're not secure, again, if you're not secure in what you have found and what you believe, then somebody else not valuing it in the same way you do suddenly becomes a threat. And so now the ego has to either just understand that people are different, or the ego will start to feel threatened. And now the desire to share almost will become flavored with dogmatism. That's one thing. I would say that another big one, if you keep it in the context of Ashtanga Yoga being the yoga that comes from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, of which Iyengar Yoga is a part. The first sutra in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras that speaks of asana, it's a very famous sutra, Sthira Sukham Asanam. He's describing what an asana is, what a yoga posture is. And the first word he uses is sthira, which means something like structure, form, technique. Then he has sukha. Sukha means something like space, a sense of ease, a sense of joy. Because the sthira comes first, and there's a part of the mind, the human mind, that really likes structure and form. And so, for example, if I find an approach that works for me, that implies some kind of structure. If I start teaching that, then again, if I'm not careful, I can get almost stuck in the instruction and in the aspect of the practice that has to do with structure and form. You see, because we forget. So in Iyengar Yoga is very well known for having tremendous discipline and details and intricacy in this structure and form, which would be the sthira aspect of the Sthira Sukham Asanam. But what's the purpose? What's the purpose for all that technique? What's the purpose for all that structure? It's to create some sense of joy, some sense of space, expansion, a sense of ease inside. If the part of the mind that's attracted to structure and form forgets what the purpose of the structure and form is, then having a skillful yoga practice almost becomes the goal in and of itself. But the purpose of having a skillful yoga practice, technique-wise, is not to have a skillful technical practice. That skill and that technique, which is sthira, is supposed to lead to sukha. That sense of ease, that sense of space, that sense of expansion. And if you forget that part, and the mind only stays with the sthira, with the structure and form, you can see very easily how the mind will build a kind of dogmatism around the correct way to do a pose. When the truth is, there can be many different ways to do a posture correctly, depending on the person, depending on the age, depending on the day. Now, you have to be careful, because there's another side to that too. There are people who have this perception that to be free means you can do whatever you want, and that there's no need for structure, there's no need for form. And that's a mistake on the other side. And people will certainly get dogmatic about that also. So certain yoga traditions, when they look at the Iyengar world, all they see is the structure and form. And they even criticize the approach sometimes. Almost thinking that we're somehow kind of rigid in our approach. Now they're putting their own dogmatic perspective onto that tradition. So really, you just go back to the source. The source of Ashtanga Yoga is Patanjali. And he says very clearly, for an asana to be considered really an asana, it has to have sthira and sukha. But notice that sthira comes first. So from the form, technique, and structure, you create a sense of space and ease in the body. When that sense of ease and space comes, the prana starts to circulate properly. The mind comes in contact with some kind of internal vitality, which puts the mind further at ease. which we were talking earlier today. When the mind is at ease, our speech and our words change toward others, our actions change, therefore the consequences of our actions change, and it reorients our karma, really. So if you see it and study it from that perspective, there's really not room for dogma, actually. Why in the modern world? What was the question? Well, the original question was what? How was
the
it
original
framed?
question was, why do you think there's so much prescribed doctrine framed in modern day yoga?
Yeah, because human beings, starting with this human being, we get confused. And
Fair enough. Yeah.
yeah, and I think really, at its root, that confusion creates insecurity. I mean, the only reason I would ever want you to believe something I believe,
It's 'cause-
in a dogmatic or in a doctrined way, was because I wanted to feel better about what I believed. Otherwise, why would I need you to believe what I believe? If I believe what I believe, I should then grant you the freedom to believe what you believe. We can have a conversation. Maybe we can even have an excited conversation. But at no point should dogma or doctrine enter into it unless there's some kind of insecurity.
Okay, and last question,
Yeah.
because it's getting late and we've got to go have dinner. What are some of the most outstanding or memorable lessons that you've had along the way as being a student and or a teacher of yoga?
I think probably the most important lesson has been learned long term. And what I mean by that is, so in my mid to late 20s, when I started to become more of a daily practitioner, just of how a daily practice completely reoriented the values of my life and what I did with my life. And so, for example, when I get up in the morning, I get up and I do my pranayama. Then I have to look after my child, and feed him breakfast and change his diaper. And by the time I'm done with those initial morning activities, I practice. I practice for whatever, 2 hours, 3 hours. Then at that point I have to go teach classes. So I go teach. And then I come home and I have some more family time. Maybe I do some pranayama in the evening. Then it's time for dinner. I read the kid a story. He goes to bed. I hang out with Marta. Like, within the structure of being a long-term dedicated yoga practitioner, at no point during the day, I don't have very much time to waste doing other things that would not necessarily be so good for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but it kind of locks you into this rhythm where really I have the energy for. I have the energy for my practice. I have the energy for my family. I have the energy for my teaching. And after that, there's no more energy. And so I can't make a mess. I don't have a lot of time to be judgmental of other people, to conspire against other people, my practice keeps me very focused. And that was a totally unintended, I didn't mean to enter into yoga to kind of create that. But as the years pass, I realized that it creates this pocket in your life and this so-called discipline where it just keeps you focused. It keeps you in line with what your values are. At least it does for me. I don't know for other people. And that in itself has its own long-term consequences and implications. Was that an answer?
It can be. I heard focus as one of the best lessons that it's taught you.
Yeah.
In short. So.
Yeah, focus and discipline.
Yeah.
I'm answering that question to another person who's a very dedicated practitioner. If I was supposed to answer that question for somebody who just goes to class a couple times a week, it would be a totally different answer.
But for somebody that's looking at yoga from afar and hasn't jumped into the dance of it yet.
Okay, so then it's a totally different.
How about that?
So, just think of it very logically. Anytime the body is sick or lacking in vitality or has disease, even the word dis-ease. This dis-ease of the body pulls the mind down. It pulls the mind into a kind of lower vibration, if I can use such a term. And it disturbs the mind. It agitates the mind unnecessarily. And you feel grumpy. You have a lack of energy. So for your job, for the people around you, for your duties in life, you can't attend to those things in the way that you really want, in the way that you really value. Mm. Everybody also knows the opposite, which is when you're feeling good physically, the mind also feels good. Mm-hmm. And practicing yoga, even once a week, twice a week, does tremendous good for the physical vitality. And that physical vitality is going to make you feel much better about your life. It's going to make you feel much better emotionally, psychologically. And whatever it is that you need to do in terms of your responsibilities and pleasures, you'll do it with much more clarity and much more pleasure, really.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We're going to enjoy the sita and the sukha of your teachings, I hope, for a long, long time.
I hope so.
Because your sita brings a lot of joy. And
well, I hope so.
Thank you very much. This
you.
is Yoga Flower.Paris. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you sometime soon.
Thank you so much for stopping by and visiting. I hope you enjoyed it. This was the second installment for my new feature of interviews. You can check out my first one with Amanda Palmer. I'll insert the link right after this. And stay tuned for a third visitor. It's a surprise. I'm going to keep that under my belt, but that will be coming up in November, December. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and if you haven't already subscribed, do so, leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, and share this with somebody. Until the next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Bye.